Hey everybody, welcome back to Lust is Boring. Super excited because the book that I've been working on for a year and a half is finally ready to go. It is at the printer. It's called Male, Female, Other, A Catholic Guide to Understanding Gender. I mean, unless you've been living under a rock for the past 5 years, you've noticed this is in the headlines on a daily basis. If you're like me, you've got friends, you got family members who maybe identify as trans, experience gender dysphoria. Maybe it's a student you work with, a kid in the youth group, family member, maybe even yourself, and wondered, okay, what does the church have to say about this? Is the church just a bunch of transphobic bigots who hate these individuals? You know, what is God's plan? The path towards sainthood for a person who experiences gender dysphoria? Should I use their preferred pronoun? You know, what about intersex condition? Does that prove that there's more than just two sexes? Well, I heard that there was some study that there's a trans brain, or some kids born trans. What about puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones? Isn't transitioning surgery a life-saving remedy for people? And if they don't transition, aren't they more likely to commit suicide? I mean, question after question after question. And a lot of Catholics aren't sure, how do you respond to these things with clarity and charity at the same time? Because it almost seems like you've got people on the left and people on the right, and they're just kind of like shouting at each other, oh no, transgender ideology, it's like a heresy, and these people yelling back. And it's almost like a husband and a wife in this big shouting match. And at their feet is a kid who feels totally invisible and ignored, that person wrestling with gender dysphoria. And so the reason we came out with this book is, in my travels over the last 5 years, I've met so many young people, so many families wrestling with this issue, and they're just looking for a resource. Like, how do we walk with these individuals in love without compromising the truth? What do we do in our confirmation class when the boy wants to be confirmed with the girl's name and wants to be in the girl's cabin? Like, what do we do pastorally to walk with these individuals in truth and in love? And so we came out with the book, Male, Female, Other, The Catholic Guide to Understanding Gender, to explain the top 18 claims made by gender theory, how you can answer them in truthfulness without burning bridges. And so if you want to pre-order the book, you can at chastity.com at the printer. So it's going to take several more weeks before it arrives at the warehouse. It is already available on iTunes, on Kindle. And so if you wanted to get the ebook version of it, you can do that. Also on Google Play. The audio book is also available, but the physical in-print book is still going to be a couple weeks out. If you want a free copy of the book, however, here's a way to get that. If you become a supporter of ours on Patreon for 1 month, we're just going to give away a free copy of the book for those who join in at $20 a month to support the mission that we're trying to do here. We'll send you a book as soon as it comes into the warehouse. We're going to send a copy immediately to you. So you just go to patreon.com/Jason Everett, or click the link in the show notes. Sign up to become a patron at the tier of $20 or more per month, and we'll send you a book for free. And so please consider doing that, because it really helps the family, the ministry, and then you're going to get the resource as soon as anybody gets it, comes to the warehouse straight off to you. And so super exciting news. So please, if you would, say a prayer, offer up a chaplet of divine mercy, a rosary for all the people who may end up reading that book, especially the people that experience gender dysphoria, so they understand that God has a plan for their life. Now, today's show, switching gears a little bit, many of you have heard of Exodus 90. People, it's not that cold shower thing. Well, it's a lot more than that. I've done Exodus 90, and it's an incredible movement, I would say, within the church. Not just an app, not just a program. It's really a movement of men, not only in the United States, but globally, who are turning to asceticism, not as just like a 90-day thing to do, but as a way of life, of a way of drawing close to Christ. And so they're about to launch a whole new season of Exodus 90. And so we've brought on the founder of this incredible movement, James Baxter, a husband, father of two, and he's going to be on the show today to explain Exodus 90 and how it could be a blessing to your life. So James, thank you for coming on Lust is Boring.
Jason, it's a thrill to be here and a privilege too. Thanks so much for the warm welcome and the awesome intro there. I appreciate you, and I appreciate that.
No, we appreciate the work that you've been doing. I know a lot of the listeners have heard of Exodus 90. I know a bunch of them have already gone through it. Some maybe have heard of it and be like, cold showers, no thanks. And I think sometimes they put it in a box like that and they miss out. It's more than just that. And sometimes you can do Exodus 90 without all that stuff. to give us a little backstory, how did you get to where you're at right now, where God put this mission on your heart? Obviously, this probably wasn't something you were thinking going up in high school and college. I need to do an ascetical app for the church. How did you get to where you're at today in your own walk?
Yeah, I started a talk once that began, if you would have told me that cold showers would be the single most distinguishing factor of my life's work, I never would have believed you, because I hate cold showers. I still hate cold showers. But yeah, it's really quite beautiful how everything's unfolded in providence, and that's totally how I look at my life, and I look at our journey here, with Exodus 90 and all the work we do at Exodus. But just going back to the beginning, my parents kind of came back to the Catholic faith through the Curcio movement. And that happened when I was not even 10 years old, and it made this huge difference in our family. And I remember life before Christ in a way, and life after Christ, through my relationship with my parents, and even just the setup of our house and the pictures of Jesus of Nazareth that appeared that did not once appear there. And so that was a huge thing in my life that ended up really shaping my trajectory, because after that point we got a lot more involved at church, got very interested and engaged in a high school boys fraternity called the Knights of the Holy Temple. And that was just a time of fraternity accountability. A lot of the things that we've embedded into Exodus were present there too. But also became my path into the seminary, because there was really close mentoring that happened. All of our stuff at the Knights revolved around liturgy as well. And so from there, I kind of went on to discern a vocation. Experienced how powerful a structured life was. And I would end up discerning out of seminary formation, but I remember leaving formation to go home just for holidays, and my mom, my dad, and others would just reflect like, gosh, the life you're living is a good life. I just, with all Catholic men, had an opportunity like this. And some people would equate it with kind of like Mormon missionary work, kind of like they do, at LDS. And, it was really in that time, when I was called out, that I felt very called on, by the Lord to take that piece of feedback and implement it, and try to build a Catholic formation house for men everywhere, who desired to be better, who knew the importance of their calling as a man, as a husband, as a father, as a priest. And at that time, in that moment, God dropped this thing called Exodus into my hands, and this whole thing started as a seminary formation, a program that a mentor of mine had started, but that I was not even in. And I just got some testimonies of these guys, and I got a basic structure, basically, of what they had been doing for years as like kind of a piloted program. And I was just so moved, by what they had to say about it. And all of a sudden, these kind of different things in my life kind of all came together. Like, okay, this is it. This is the opportunity to build something, to make a difference, and hopefully to share a formation mentality and vision with men everywhere that are open to it and interested in it. So I'm also super entrepreneurial. I love chaos. I don't do very well with processes. And so just the idea of building something from nothing basically captivated me. And that was in 2015, and here we are, in year 8, and I'm just stunned, by what God has done, with all of it.
It's neat to see the imprint of God the Father on the passions that he gave you in terms of, you mentioned creating something from nothing. That's the act of the Father. That's creation ex nihilo, is how he created everything that has come to be, everything from nothing. And so he's like giving you a share of his passion of creativity, of just like, okay, we got nothing, but like just speak it into existence. And now a lot of people, when they hear about just the nature of Exodus 90, penance, fasting, being kind of hard on yourself and cutting back on this and that, kind of trimming the fat out of your life, so to speak. Some people just don't understand, I think, the spiritual theological framework of that. It's like, okay, penance, Why be hard on myself? Like, why fast? I mean, didn't Jesus, pay the price of my redemption? What's the point of me having to do penance? I've already gotten forgiveness. God has already saved me. What's the point of penance? What is the point of fasting? Could you maybe speak into why this is fruitful for a Christian life? Not only fruitful, but I think necessary.
So before I do that, I want to go back to your point about the creation ex nihilo, because there was one day I was super annoyed, super frustrated. Something broke or wasn't working. And I remember where I was. I was actually at a Sikh conference a couple of years ago. And I remember just going to the chapel and I was just like, Lord, like, do you know how hard it is, to start something from nothing? And to be honest with you, like, I truly prayed that prayer. Okay. This is after, 25 years of, intentional Christian living. And in that moment, I was like, oh man, I have no idea what I'm asking for there.
Yeah.
Of course he knows, so, anyway, I just wanted to share that.
Yeah.
That was not my brightest moment.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, Jason, feel free to jump in here too and add anything that you would to this. But I think in short, the call to penance, is a response to human sinfulness. And even though Christ comes and saves us from our sins and offers the perfect sacrifice on the cross that we need not, add to in any way, he calls us and invites us through the sacramental life of the church to participate in his life. He shares with us his mission. And so penance then is an opportunity to enter into his sufferings. And what's different, about our experience from Christ is he was perfect. He had no personal sin to remedy. And that's not our story. I mean, all of us are culpable. All of us fall short. All of us miss the mark. And that's noting that apart from just the sins of the world, which also need remedied in Christ. And so that's why we see all throughout the scriptures, I mean, even before Jesus, the people of Israel often entering into penitential offerings to God as remedies for sin. Mm-hmm. And even after in the life of the saints, I mean, you're never going to find a saint whose life was comfortable or whose life ended, and they were comfortable ever after. I mean, we often find them voluntarily taking up penances for their sins and the sins of the world. And the saints, who are the saints? I mean, they're not cookie cutters by any means. They're probably the most unique people to walk the face of the earth, all of them deeply in touch with not just their own sinfulness, but their absolute dependence upon God. Yeah. And so, the call to penance is a call to participate in life, in Christ's life. And it's really an opportunity to set right, to straighten, often the broken paths of our lives through our sin. Those are just some first thoughts. What would you say to that same question?
Yeah, when I think of the fasting and the penance, like people, how do I really need to do it? I mean, Jesus said, you will do it. I mean, what he says, when the bridegroom is taken away from them, then they will fast. So it isn't to me like just this optional upgrade if you want to do, I'll skip ice cream and Lent kind of thing. I mean, church teaches that every Friday of the year, you should be doing some form of penance or mortification every single Friday, not just during like the 40 days of Lent. And obviously everyone's called to do it, to different degrees. When I was visiting the Holy Land this last summer, we took a bus ride to the top of the Valley of the Shadow of Death. So this is the road that goes from Jerusalem down to Jericho. And it's, like a 5-hour walk through this valley in the desert, and something you really shouldn't even try in the dead of the summer. I mean, you'd be dead 2 hours into the hike, but there's kind of an aqueduct that runs alongside the path, but it'd be a place where bandits and robbers could easily assail somebody in the middle of the desert and they'd have no chance. That's where the whole story of the Good Samaritan took place on that path. But when we were on top of this big hill, we looked down and there's a monastery carved into the wall at the bottom of the Valley of the Shadow of the Death. And I'm like, oh, that is so cool. And they said, yeah, that's probably, Elijah was probably down there before it was built. That's why they built that there. There's caves where hermits go into. And I'm like, oh, we got to go back there. So I asked the bus driver, can you bring us back in 2 days and we'll hike to the bottom? And sure enough, he did. And, a dozen of us or so went down there. And when we went down there, we got to go in this monastery and they're explaining that in these caves, there's ladders leading up to the caves, and the hermits would go up there for retreats of basically 40 days of prayer and fasting, where the other monks would kind of, take a rope up to them to bring up a meal or up the ladder and dump a little meal in there once a day, some bread or potatoes or water, whatever, and that they'd have no human contact, nothing but a little bread and water for basically 40 days, and they're just in there in contemplation. And what came to me is like, man, you're never going to know the names of these saints, who are in these places. But the conversations that they must have had with God in that little hole tucked up in the rock in the middle of the desert for 40 days. I mean, who knows the conversations that took place there? And so Christ, I think, gives us the opportunity for joining him in this mission. And he speaks to us kind of, I don't know, in unique ways when you're kind of filtering out the noise of life and your stomach starts grumbling, like, why am I hungry? Oh, it's because I'm fasting. Why am I fasting anyway? Oh, I'm fasting because of this. So it's like you're using your body to pray, and your body is drawing you into contemplation. Whereas sometimes when we're not having penance, our body is just telling us what we're craving. I want food, eat it. And that's why they say gluttony is the forerunner of lust, or gluttony is the sister of lust. And that if that vice is in place, lust is like just 2 steps behind it. And that's why if we can nip it in the bud, practice self-mastery with my diet in some extent, then self-mastery with the rest of the body tends to fall into place. Now, you'd mentioned at the beginning the plan of life that you had in the seminary. I think priests kind of have that in the sense they got the liturgy of the hours. Laity can do that too. The Jews in the Old Testament had the Psalms at different parts of the day, specific times, specific prayers, specific rituals. A lot of times I think the laity is kind of just floating out in space in the sense like, I got Mass on Sunday, but like, okay, well, what's the daily plan of life? What's that structure? So how were you able to take a structure of life, a plan of life in the seminary and make that accessible to the laity?
Yeah, it's an awesome point. And it's so true that that's often neglected kind of in the lay experience today. And honestly, when I look at Exodus 90 as a specific regimen, for a period of time, all it is it kind of structures life, sets boundaries on a lot of the things that men often fall into, whether that's with technology or with food, with drink, and really just provides a period of intensification for a purpose, for an intention. But beyond just like set periods of time, like during Exodus 90, it's so important for all of us to have plans of life, basically commitments, or probably a secular person would look at it like principles, that you live by. And I say this not as someone that's perfect at this. I actually just went through a ton of transitions in my life. My family moved over the summer. There's tons of things going on here at work at Exodus, and lots of newness. And in addition to just being in a new environment, our family is growing. I have a son that's 3, a daughter that's 1, another on the way. Life is just hitting me in the face right now. Like, I'm just constantly in front of things that I don't know. And what I realized is, like, as my life was filling up, I was losing my plan. I was losing, my routine. And so literally just a couple of weeks ago, I was like, you know what? And this is with the help of a friend, I need to tighten the screws. I need to just get back to kind of structuring my day, finding greater consistency and reliability. And ultimately, what I find in my own experience, of doing this well at times and doing this poorly at others, is that the voice of God is just so much more present when consistently, I'm before him, and consistently I'm offering intentions, and consistently I'm doing acts of asceticism and acts of penance. And when I don't have that structure and I don't have that time, everything can just seem a little arbitrary, or a little bit random, or I just seem so much less under the influence of providence and allowing really God's plan to inform, my own and my own life. So I, just as an encouragement, if these thoughts about like a rule of life or a plan of life just seem for, those in a monastery, I'd really ask you to reconsider that assumption, and really just consider what a day would look like, a day where you do set aside time for God. If you're married, time set aside for your, for your spouse, for great, conversations and interactions. In my experience, those days on plan, if you will, are much better. And it's funny how a little bit of discipline actually really fulfills the longings of my heart much more than just doing whatever I want, or just randomly going with the notifications that come my way on whatever device that I'm looking at. And it's not to say that God doesn't often interrupt us, and often throw our plan awry, but I think when you're really living an intentional rule, you're so much more aware of
Yeah.
those interventions than when you're not. So.
Yeah, a friend of mine, I used to lead a Bible study in San Diego when I first moved there after college, and one of the guys in the Bible study kind of challenged me on a particular Lent. He just said, one of the things he does is that no noise all of Lent, meaning when he's in the car, there is no music, even praise and worship. No Christian music, no Christian podcast, nothing. No Pints with Aquinas, no Father Mike Schmitz, like nothing. You just got to go quiet. And I'm like, okay, and so even working out, no earbuds, no rock and roll, nothing. And so I'm like, okay, I'll give that a try. It was amazing. Just like the first days of Lent, you get in the car, you start driving, and then you reach for the button, you reach for the noise. Oh, I can't. And then you're driving like 45 seconds. You're like, noise. You're like, whoa, what is going on in me? That like I've become so addicted to input that like when I sit still, my mind just goes places and I don't need it running off, and I just need something going in instead of it being still. But then I found like after, several days, couple weeks of doing this, the reaching stopped, a stillness kind of started to settle into place, greater clarity, greater productivity, more conversation with God, better ability to listen in prayer. Because when I would go into prayer previously, it was almost like if you took a cup and you really stirred it around, then you sat it down, and it's still stirring, for 30 seconds before the whirlpool kind of stops. And I think if I create more stillness outside of prayer, when then I actually go into prayer, it's more easy to go in. And then likewise, then prayer in a sense lasts longer. You kind of stay in prayer. I mean, that was a word that kind of came to me a week or two ago in prayer, just like stay in prayer. Okay, it's not just, okay, I finished my adoration, go to the next thing. No, like stay in prayer. And what are the things throughout the day that knock me out of prayer? Because you look at someone like John Paul II, he wouldn't like make time for prayer. He would kind of make time to come out of prayer for the sake of other people. Like, okay, but he was pretty much walking from point A to point B. He was going back into prayer. Like he was staying in a state of prayerfulness. So maybe if you could outline a little bit for the people who might not be familiar with Exodus 90, like, okay, plan of life, what does that look like? What am I supposed to implement? And if I start doing these things, what is that going to do to alleviate different triggers that might be leading me into certain vices that I am having trouble overcoming?
Yeah, no, that's an awesome question. Happy to do that. I would just say on the thought about the music that you can find, listen to. I don't know about you if you're on Spotify, but I just got my year 2022 rewind from Spotify, which I was really excited to get. But one of the things that is, whether they intend it to be or not, is like an ultimate form of accountability. Like, what did you listen to in the last year? And I, like you, can just find myself drifting to things that I'm like, why am I even listening to this? Like, this is not great.
Yeah.
And it's not even like hardcore rap or anything. It's just like, this is just not lifting my soul to God.
Yeah.
And anyway, as it's going through this rewind, I'm like, yeah, that was a great month. Oh, that was not so good. But a time like Exodus, and other times just through other, Lent or other kind of disciplined regimen times, are a time to tighten the screws a little bit and prune it out. And that's exactly what Exodus is meant to be. So just to make a distinction, I think it's really important for all of us to set plans of life. And then I just think at other times on particular intentions, it's okay, to set kind of an added regimen to that plan that kind of intensifies it for a specific reason. Lent is a perfect example. During Exodus 90 is another solid one. So the 90-day experience really comprises a couple pillars: prayer, asceticism, and fraternity. And, an Exodus without prayer or fraternity is not an Exodus, it's something that we like to say, because, without, frequent time given to God, and during Exodus, we call the men to pray for an hour a day. And if that seems unreasonable, at least 20 minutes of silent contemplative prayer, as well as to read a passage from the book of Exodus, which we provide. And that's just so important to ground and give a meaning and an eternal weight to the things that you're doing, the things that you take up. And that kind of leads to the ascetic kind of components of Exodus. A person 100 years ago would look at this list and wouldn't actually know what we're talking about, because they were just embedded, into everyday life. But in so many ways, and so many poets have said this much more beautifully, but today, we're in a desert wasteland, and it's just like surprisingly full of things that we don't need. And during Exodus, you just put some brackets, you put some boundaries around yourself, through a couple of commitments. So I'll just go down the line. You take, short, cold showers. You practice regular, intense exercise. We encourage guys to get a full night's sleep. Abstain from alcohol, desserts, sweets, eating between meals, soda, sweet drinks. We abstain from television, movies, televised sports, video games, non-essential material purchases as well, because obviously that can also be kind of a form of a trigger. We listen to music that lifts our souls to God. We use our tech just for work and essential tasks. And on Wednesdays and Fridays, we call men to days of fasting, just as the church does on Ash Wednesday and Good Friday. So not full fast, but just, it's 2 small meals and a larger meal without meat. And that can sound like a lot. And I think it is a lot. And it's important when you undertake something like Exodus to have a good reason for doing it and to be prepared for it, not to just kind of find yourself there. But the secret of it all, which most everyone reports through the process, is it's not overwhelming in a couple of days. What you find is like your life is a lot slower and you are a lot less busy than you think. This is the great lie, I think, of modern life. I think it's a great lie of Satan today in the distracting times in which we find ourselves. We think we don't have enough time, for the most important things. And that is definitely wrong, when our priorities are straight and when they are set. And so really asceticism is not an end. And St. Jerome actually says this beautifully, and we surface this in our own work, which is to say, you're not to be inflated or proud of yourself, when you commit to acts of asceticism, because they're not the point. The point is not to prove anything. It's really about the end, and that end is union with God, and so when you take a look at Exodus 90, or just times of other regimens or other times where you feel like you want to focus on a particular virtue and you need to take on a regimen, it's just important not to confuse the ends, the means for the end, right? So asceticism leads us to union with God. And lastly, during Exodus, you commit to a fraternity. You have a fraternity of 5 to 7 guys. Mostly you just invite your friends from the parish, from school, from work, from the community, the neighborhood. And then within that fraternity that you meet with every week, you have an anchor. It's what we call your accountability partner that you just check in with every day. And so what do you talk about every day, or what do you talk about every week? Is a good question. And the importance of fraternity, especially in the isolating times that we're in, is only more felt now, in year 8 of this than it was even when we started in 2015. Mm-hmm. Guys are longing for companions, longing for like true friendships in which like the most important things are discussed, and a place to just be accountable. Because I think all of us want to be great husbands, great fathers, but you need brothers, that keep you accountable, to your mission and to your tasks. And there's a kind of dynamism that happens in a fraternal context. It just doesn't happen, not in other places. Oftentimes, masculine friendships can just evolve into just watching sports, mm-hmm. or some common activity. And neither of those things are bad in themselves, but Christians are called to higher forms of friendship, and I think an Exodus fraternity is a good example. Of that opportunity. So all of these things are really meant to be a regimen on an intention, that you have, whether it's to become a better husband, a better father, to be more focused at work, whatever it might be, to maybe make reparation for your sins, the sins of the church, church's members, or another intention, and with that why and with that motivation, you really have what you need to make it through, a challenging time. And no doubt Exodus is a challenge, and that's important to note at the start.
Now, when Exodus 90 is over and you've finished your wilderness journey through Egypt and you reach the promised land after 90 days and you get your warm shower, what does Exodus 365 look like, in a sense, of like the rest of the year? Like what aspects of a plan of life do you keep alive? Like what type of things that you learned during those 3 months do you tend to integrate as a husband and a father? Like, what does James Baxter's plan of life look like? Or what have other husbands that you look up to, or other Christian men that you look up to? Like, specifically, what's in their plan of life that kind of creates a bit of a prayer structure in their life, so they're not just kind of floating, okay, I'll try to be a better person. Like what pillars? Because I found the spiritual life so much is just about picking up good habits and adding to them as time goes on. Like when I wake up, this is what I do. Before I go to bed, this is what I do. In the morning after this, I do that. What are some maybe plans of life that a person can glean from Exodus 90, or even people that aren't doing the actual program? Like what does a plan of life look like based on the pillars and principles of Exodus 90?
Yeah, I think it's important to note that everybody's plan of life should be different, depending on their state in life. And not just their state in life, but where they're at. I mean, a guy's plan with a 1-month-old baby, when I've been there a couple times,
Yeah.
I know you have been many times, is very different, from a guy who's 50 years old, kids out of the house, in college or whatever. So it's important to note, like, there's a lot of room, for where you are, where God has you.
Yeah.
What you're working on, what you're thinking about, the challenges that you're facing. But I do think there's commonalities. I think there should be prayer, in your plan. There should be some kind of asceticism in your plan. And you've got to have true friends, like true friends, that know you and that you know as well. I could walk you through my plan if that's helpful. I basically actually have a schedule.
Yeah, we'll take it.
For my day. Yeah, I mean, when I wake up, I just try to acknowledge God first thing. I don't try to, I turn off my alarm, but I don't try to just spend time on my phone. I try to acknowledge God. First thing, make that morning offering. If that's a traditional morning offering, awesome. If that's another prayer that you have, great. But I just find that upon first consciousness, it's just so important to unite yourself, with the good Father, with the Son, with the Holy Spirit. From there, I actually go downstairs and I pray in my house. So some people make their holy hours at church, and that's great. But for me, the reason I do that is because my dad did. When I was growing up, my father was always praying in the same chair every single day. And it just seared in and this is post his conversion, which I mentioned earlier, it just seared in my consciousness. Like, that's how a man begins his day. And so that's what I do. And so my son always wakes up before my wife. He comes down and he sits with me towards the end of that time of prayer. Now, sometimes he's up a little early. Prayer time gets cut a little bit short. But I just try to take an hour. It's in that time that I read my daily reflection. But mostly I'm just there. I'm just there kind of ruminating, with God, maybe thinking a little bit about the day, and the different things that I want to focus on. But I just find that, without that time with God and even just with myself to just check in, like, how am I doing? How am I feeling today? What am I nervous about? What am I anxious about? What am I excited about? I just find that the rest of the day is just completely haphazard, thing after thing after thing.
Yeah.
But with that time, I'm just much more centered and much more with God. From there, I go to Mass. That's not possible for everybody, but that's my first thing. And then when I show up to work, I kind of prepare my day, and I have 2 different sessions, and I call them deep work sessions. And during deep work time, I don't take meetings. I try to do the most important thing, and typically it's something that I don't want to do, and that's stretching me. I'm learning something, or I'm, having a conversation, that's important, or reading something. But that's important for me, is just to really take time in each day to make sure the most important thing's done. Midday, take a break, pause, try to remember the Lord, and try to, do a little bit of a check-in. How am I doing? How's the day going? From there, I kind of transition into lunch, obviously, but then I just kind of, what I do is I call it shallow work time. So from 1 to 4, or 1, and that often bleeds to 5. It's just meetings, answering emails. We use Basecamp as our internal team communication system. So I catch up in Basecamp, and just kind of get people the information or things that they need and expect from me, at work. So that's what I do. I try to be home in time, early enough to work out. That sometimes doesn't happen, I must confess. I'm tightening that screw right now. And if you met me, you'd be like, James, you should be a little bulkier than you are, man. You should be a little more jacked. And I'm like, I know, man. I'm working on it, Jason. So that's that. From there, I really try to turn off my electronics, though. At 6 p.m. is my goal, just to have everything off and just try to be with my kids. My son, who's 3, my daughter, who's 1, my wife. Go through our nighttime routines with the kids, and kind of cap the day with a little bit of reading, a little bit of examination of the day, and kind of go from there. The one ascetic thing I didn't mention is we take cold showers. I ask every employee at Exodus to commit to cold showers every day, just to remember the guys that we reach, and offer those sacrifices for them and for their intentions in the family. So that's a big part of the beginning of my day as well. So anyway, it sounds like a lot, but honestly, it slows down the day a ton, when you have those structures. And those are just a couple of things. So, if you're listening to this, that's probably really boring, but, there's some things to apply. It's like, okay, a morning offering, that's a good thing. Some committed prayer time, whether it's an hour or it's 10 minutes or it's 5 minutes, whatever that is that you can do is important. Time for deep work. I think a lot of people's time at work, if they're really honest with themselves, is pretty shallow, and it depends on everybody's work, but especially those like kind of what they call knowledge workers. If you can be remote, that's fine, but it's just take time to do the hard stuff, the good stuff, the meaningful stuff, the stuff that really moves the needle. Get away, unplug at the end, try not to take it home, try to be present, and then make sure you end the day with prayer. So times for examinations of conscience, just an examine of the day. If you're familiar with this, Ignatian practices are really solid. So those are some things that I've committed to, but I'd love to hear, do you have a plan that you're on right now, Jason?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the first thing that I try to do when the alarm clock goes off is hit that snooze button 6 times. No. When the alarm clock goes off, first thing I try to do is Marian consecration, the one, the de Montfort. That's kind of my favorite one. So start the day kind of with a Marian angle. And then I've got on my app just kind of the daily mass readings. And so I can just, first thing I'll do is just immediately, what am I going to hear later that morning, for morning mass? And so I'll go through the morning mass readings, have a little bit of time for like off liturgy hours kind of stuff, just a little bit of time for that. And then I have drop the kids off at school, and then I've got some time for adoration afterwards, and then daily mass, which I do it. The mass is 8 o'clock in the morning. After mass, a little bit more adoration, and then off to CrossFit. I do an hour workout right after that down the street from church. So it's a solid hour in the church, solid hour in the gym, and then home for work. And then, peppering prayers throughout the day or whatever. And then in the evening, we try to do a rosary with the kids. Sometimes that's completely insane. But we've built a chapel in the house. When we moved into this house, we had his and hers walk-in closets. And I'm like, I don't need a walk-in closet. Like, I can fit my clothes in a suitcase. What am I going to do with this? And so I thought, well, maybe I'll just, put up a little religious picture, and it'll be a little prayer area. And then I'm like, well, maybe we could go big here, and we'll make a little altar, and then we put candles on it. And I'm like, well, we can rip out these shelves, and I could put pews in. So I got on Craigslist, bought pews, and so we put 2 pews in the closet so everybody can kind of cram into the 2 pews more or less. And so I just found it so much easier to get the kids to focus when you can turn the lights down, get some candles lit. And it's better than having it in the living room when they're like, there's Nerf guns and they're trying to shoot each other between the second and third decade of the rosary, and the dogs are running around crazy. You kind of got to carve out that little spot. But a book that was helpful for me was by the president of our university, Father Michael Scanlon, priest. He had a booklet called Appointment with God. I mean, it was probably written 30 years ago. So if you haven't heard of this book, get this thing. I mean, this is a very well-educated, successful Harvard law graduate, saintly, charismatic priest who just wrote this book about how you have to make an appointment with God like you do with any other client, and you stick to it. And so if you're a CFO and someone calls your office and it's 2 o'clock, it's like your secretary going, oh, I'm sorry, he's got an appointment from 2 to 3. What's your appointment? It's an appointment with God. And he just talks about how you can build this into your schedule. Now, obviously, not everybody in their corporate position is able to pull that off. You can't tell your boss, I'm having 4 hours of contemplation right now. I can't work. But you got to figure out how it's going to fit into your day of your plan of life, and you schedule it there. And you're so much more fruitful. Like Father Mike Scanlon took Franciscan University of Steubenville, which used to be on actually one of the top party schools according to Playboy magazine back in like the 1970s,
No way.
And turned it into this bastion of Catholic orthodoxy and evangelization that's a beacon for the entire world. How did he do that? Well, he would spend 4 hours in prayer every morning before he did anything. It was like Moses going into the tent of meeting with God the Father before he's going to march out with Israelites and move the base camp or whatever. He had his tent of meeting. That was his time with the Father. And so Father Mike's was 4 hours in the morning, and he wouldn't do anything until he knew what God wanted him to do that day. And as a result, the fruitfulness of it. And we're so convinced it needs to be the opposite. Like the more I do, I'm going to ask God to bless it, and I'm going to do like 23 hours of work. But there's a quote that a friend gave me of St. John of the Cross, and I'll read it to you. And this is just kick in the pants stuff. He said, quote, "Let those then who are singularly active, who think they can win the world with their preaching and exterior works, observe here that they would profit the church and please God much more, not to mention the good example they would give, were they to spend at least half of this time with God in prayer. They would then certainly accomplish more and with less labor by one work than they otherwise would by 1,000. For through their prayer, they would merit this result, and they themselves be spiritually strengthened. Without prayer, they would do a great deal of hammering, but accomplish little, and sometimes nothing, and even at times cause harm." St. John of the Cross. It's like,
that's
boom.
an amazing quote.
Yeah, I mean, that's St. John of the Cross. I mean, who accomplishes more than the saints? Why? Because who prays more than the saints? It's just, I remember a priest saying, hyperactivity in the apostolic life is a sign of spiritual laziness. And it was like, whoa, like but it's true. Like we so much want to be active to see the fruit of our labors. I did this, I accomplished that. Look how productive I am. But it's a sign of spiritual laziness. Like I don't want to do the heavy lifting of contemplation. I don't want to do the work of prayer, of letting God be the one to do the things. There's a lot of self-love intermingled with apostolic hyperactivity and laziness
100%.
As well.
Yeah, we've tried to embed this into our culture here at Exodus. Couple of ways. We pray a prayer to Saint Joseph the Worker every day as we start work, and we end all of our meetings actually with the Glory Be. And I'm sure you kind of begin and end your meetings the same way, Jason. One thing about this prayer to Saint Joseph the Worker, maybe you can include this in the show notes or something, but I found this prayer. I loved it. I fell in love with it. I fell in love with it so much I had to go tell my dad about it. And he says, as I enter the door and tell him this, he says, "Wait here," and he pulls out this very tattered prayer card. He said, "Yeah, prayed that same prayer every day as I began work after my conversion." And after that, I had my sign. I was like, "All right, we got to pray this every day, guys."
Yeah.
So we started to do that, and even though we have this expectation that guys work about 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week, one of the things that we made really clear is like, hey, if you need to borrow an hour a day for an hour of prayer every day, that's completely fine. Because those 7 hours will be so much better. Even if they're not like productive in the world's eyes, they're productive in God's eyes, and they're sacred in God's eyes. Yeah. With that kind of rooting in prayer. So those are just a couple of things that we've tried to do to, better live, that call to the contemplative life, which is, such a fully Catholic ideal.
Yeah, and if you can email me the link to that specific, because I know there's different prayers to St. Joseph the Worker, but the one that you found, I'll just stick it in the show notes so people can listen to that. I'll take the quote from St. John of the Cross. I'll stick that one in the show notes. If people want to cut and paste it, use that one. But before we close, I wanted to hit on tying this into chastity. What's the fruit? When you start doing this, you start living more chastely with your eyes, with your ears, with your body. What becomes then the fruit of chastity? Because sometimes we think of chastity as the fruit of penance, but what is the fruit of chastity once that starts to bloom in your life?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the thing that I would say is, with Exodus, we set a structure, we set a regimen for a period of time. And a lot of guys find that to be super helpful, especially for those that come, struggling, as most men do, with chastity, with sins of, pornography and masturbation in particular. And Exodus is not an addictions program. It's not, necessarily, it's not a chastity program, I would say. But what I've been so struck by is how when you do commit to a plan of life, and when you do at times, like in Exodus 90, commit to a regimen for a purpose, you find a real difference in your experience with these behaviors. And so we do before and after studies every single year. And it's alarming how different guys are before and after for those that struggle with sins of pornography and masturbation. And it's not a magic bullet. It's not perfect, but the frequency is alarming. Our average guy comes into Exodus, 43% of guys is the number, struggle with pornography once a week. By the end of Exodus, only about 20% of guys struggle with pornography once a week. So, more than halved which is really exceptional. And so Exodus is not a magic bullet, but I think it's just an example of when you commit to a plan, and when you're focused, for particular regimens, the fruit of that is in your behavior. Like it changes the way that you live, which is super, super important. I do want to just, make, kind of a shout out here that for those in the throes of addiction, it's so important that you get the support and the help that you need, from licensed, qualified therapists. Make sure that your spiritual directors are, have the right kind of sensitivities and kind of awareness of human formation to be able to give you solid guidance, because so often these struggles can be just spiritualized and kind of looked at from a supernatural perspective. And I think that's an error. God has this profound respect for the creation that he made and respect for the natural order. And from a Catholic vision and a Catholic standpoint, it's so important for the human and the spiritual to come together, in unity, just like, that's who we are, body, soul composites.
Yeah.
So anyway, I just want to do make that shout out. Now, the fruit of this, though, which was your question, Jason, is, to me, it's like a clarified vision, first. And what I mean by that is, like, when you are, coming into a greater kind of self-mastery and growing in the virtue of chastity, I think you see not just your life, but you see your day, you see reality, and you see others much more clearly. Mm-hmm. But it's not just like what you see with your eyes. I feel like it's also true from a spiritual perspective as well. St. John Henry Newman, who's my favorite saint, one of his principles and themes in all of his preaching was just that the invisible world and invisible realities are much more present and much more real than what we can see with our eyeballs. So I think, another fruit of this clarified vision through chastity is just a spiritual attunement, to understand as you're meeting people, as you're going about your day, like there are other forces here. Some of those forces are on your side, and other of those forces are trying to destroy you. And without, the virtue of chastity, I think it's just really hard to stay attuned and to see clearly, not just your day and your life, but what's really unfolding, in the present from an eternal kind of perspective. And the vision, though, is not just for itself, but it's for love, right? Like as knowledge grows, your capacity to love grows, and vice versa. Yeah. And this, I think increases your ability to truly love. And I know I've experienced this in my own life. When I reflect on, times as a teenager and, in my 20s, even struggles with chastity. Gosh, it just like blurred my vision. It compromised my ability to love. And, through work, through practice, through prayer, through counsel, it's just amazing. So it's amazing to me, honestly, the kind of clearer vision, and I feel like greater capacity to love in my relationship with my spouse, just as one example. Yeah. And I think, I don't know what you would say to that same question, Jason, but those are a couple of things that come to mind.
No, I mean, that's for blessed are the pure in heart. They're going to see God, not only in heaven, but in this life, in their girlfriend and their wife and their kids and themselves.
Yeah, Jesus said that a lot more succinctly.
Yeah, he sums it up pretty fast. He gets the point. But yeah, just that crystallization, that clarity of vision, clarity of thought, whereas sin really dulls us, not only dulling our intellect, dulling our spiritual senses and our capacities and faculties, but just dulling us as individuals. I mean, we just become dull the more we dive into that stuff, because it's really, it obscures, in a sense, our own personality. That sin takes us away from ourselves, whereas purity of heart and the virtues just in general make you more fully who God has created you to be, which is a person who is free to love in his image and likeness. And so, love the work that you're doing there. I mean, I think that brings so much clarity and peace to have this structure in your day and life. And, Exodus 90, like you said, it's not a silver bullet, but I'll tell you, it's a bullet. It's a bullet. It's something to put in the arsenal. It's something that we need. And everybody's kind of got, I think, a different idol in their life. It could be alcohol. It could be this. It's kind of like the end of Three Amigos when everyone has their own El Guapo. For some people, your El Guapo is this. For some, it's actually the El Guapo. But some people, like your El Guapo, your idol could be your snooze button. And that could be robbing you of 20 minutes of morning prayer. That could be like the beginning bookend of your day. With evening prayer, the ending bookend, so that things between stand in order. But if the devil knows he can just pull out one of those bookends, then everything else can kind of collapse and become disordered. And so Exodus 90, I know there's different cycles in which they do it. The next one's coming up real fast, January 9th. I think you guys are kicking off the next one. People can go to exodus.com/Jason to sign up. But tell them a little bit about that, how they can sign up, and what you guys are about to kick off before we wrap up here.
Absolutely. Our biggest time of the year is 90 days to Easter Sunday. And that obviously that date moves every year with the movement of Easter in the calendar. But our start date, as you said, Jason, is January 9th. So, weeks out, it's an awesome time to just reflect, to pray, to really discern whether or not God is calling you, to make an exodus. And I phrase it that way because when we ask guys why you're here, the number one reason is God called me, which is a really humbling thing to find in boring survey data.
Yeah.
And so I would just ask, you pray about it. Maybe consider, if there's something in Exodus that attracts you, that draws you, whether it's an idol, that you're aware of, or even if it's just, you want a more full, disciplined, prayerful life, consider that, and then maybe consider a guy or two that's in need of an Exodus as well. Exodus 90 is not a self-help experience. It's a fraternal one, and the reason why Exodus has grown from nothing, a couple of years ago to something all over the world, is because guys just like you, Jason, guys, like our listeners here, saw in it something that they wanted, and then they had the courage, to invite a friend, and so don't just reflect on your own experience here, but consider those in your life that are in need of, a really life-giving and liberating spiritual exercise. It's not easy all the time. It is challenging, but I think men, especially today, are looking for that, need that, and it's blessed tens of thousands of men, that have come before. I just kind of conclude here with just that, 90 days to Easter, it makes for a really powerful experience of the new year. And is really an awesome intensification of the experience of Lent, to really land, in that solemnity of Easter, celebrating the resurrection of our Lord in a powerful new way. And, if that sounds like something you're up for, I'd invite you to, check out exodus90.com/Jason, just like you said. Yeah,
there's nothing worse than getting through Lent, Easter Sundays there, and I could have done that a lot better. I really didn't pull too hard during this Lent. Maybe next year. And it's a lot of times we just lack that structure. We lack that. And so exodus90.com/Jason. You guys can sign up. I'll put the link in the show notes. Also another link in the show notes, chastity.com/gender. And that's where you can get a new copy of the book, Male, Female, Other, Catholic Guide to Understanding Gender, that we've been working on. Or if you don't want to pay $21.95 to get a new copy of the book, just support us on Patreon at $20 or more, and we'll send you a copy for free of the book. So that's why it's patreon.com/Jason Everett. Sign up for $20 or more, and we'll send you for free as soon as it gets to the warehouse in a couple weeks, a copy of the book on gender and how you can answer that with clarity and charity. So James Baxter, thank you for coming on the show, and keep up the awesome work you're doing with Exodus 90, and God bless your family.
Jason, God bless your family. Thank you so much for this time today. It's been a joy.
Thanks so much.